Hello, I'm Zhang Chunzhen, I'm from accounting.
I'm Song Pei, I'm from accounting too.
And I'm Chen Pingqi from business administration.
Hello everyone, I'm Zhang Chunzhen from accounting department. Today I'm going to answer the questions of economics quiz 2. The first recurrent question is about COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic is impacting Taiwan economy and the rest of the world. How can pandemic influence the aggregate demand in Taiwan? The COVID-19 pandemic will decrease the demand in Taiwan and shift the aggregate demand curve to left. It is because people seldom go outside and therefore reduce the consumption of certain industry, such as petroleum industry, tourism, and catering. I'm going to use models to analyze the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on Taiwan economy in the short run and in the long run. In the short run, as mentioned before, the demand decrease and the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left. The equilibrium point moves from A to B. However, in the long run, it will remedy itself since actual prices are below prior expectations. Price expectations will be reduced over time and wages and prices will fall to levels commensurate P3. The short-run aggregate supply curve shifts right and achieves point C, which solves the recession but makes price level even lower. What should policymakers do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by COVID-19 pandemic? The government should shift the aggregate demand curve to the right and achieve the original equilibrium point by increasing consumption, government spending, and money supply. If properly done, the government moves the economy back to point A. What policies have been already implemented by Taiwanese authorities in response to COVID-19 pandemic? Government budget 19 billion NT dollars for disease prevention and 40 billion NT dollars for relief program, which includes financial aid, employment assistance, and tax breaks. There are also some relief measures for individuals such as personal loan relief, employment assistance, and tax assistance. I'll choose one policy and explain why the government implements such policy in response to the pandemic. The policy for individuals relief program not only increase government spending, but also stimulate consumption, which shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right. The second recurrent question is about the trade war between USA and China. Since the late 2018, USA and China have been in a trade war. To be more specific, USA has gradually raised tariff on imported products from China. At the same time, many foreign businesses in China, including Taiwan's Foxconn, have reduced investments in China and increased investments in USA. President Trump believes that it can benefit the US economy because net export of USA will increase. Let me introduce more about the trade war between USA and China. The trade war between USA and China is an ongoing economic conflict between the world's two largest national economies and the world's two superpowers, China and the United States. In the picture, we can see that USA has an increasing deficit to China. Therefore, President Trump in 2018 began setting tariffs and other trade barriers on China with the goal of forcing it to make changes to what the US says are unfair trade practices. And there are some effects in both countries. We will talk more about it later. I'm going to use models to analyze the simultaneous impacts of both tariff policy and capital flow on the following macroeconomic variables of US economy. For the tariff policy, it reduced USA's imports and thus increased net export at each exchange rate. The demand curve in exchange market shifts up and causes an appreciation. However, it doesn't affect the domestic loanable market, so the real interest rate is unchanged. NCO and NX also remain the same because the reduction in imports by rise in exchange value of dollars offset this effect by reducing exports. For the capital flow, since many foreign businesses increase their investments in USA, the investment curve shifts to right, increasing the real interest rate, and therefore reduce the NCO. The reduction in NCO shifts the supply curve to left, increasing the real exchange rate, which means an appreciation. By the equation NX equals NCO, we can know that the net export also decrease.
Hello, now I'm going to answer some questions from the Economic Quiz 2, and I'm Song Pei from the Department of Accounting. The next question is to use appropriate models to analyze the short-run impacts of both tariff and capital flow on the macroeconomic variables of China economy. Because the tariff will decrease net export and the capital flow will decrease investment in China economy, we speculate that the aggregate demand will decrease. Let's take a look at the graph. The aggregate demand curve will shift from the right side to the left side, causing the equilibrium point to shift from point A to point B. Therefore, the overall price will decrease. And now, we'll take a look at another graph. A decrease in investment will shift the demand for loanable funds from the right side to the left side. As a result, the real interest rate will decrease. The decrease in the real interest rate will also lead to an increase in the net capital outflow. The increase in net capital outflow will shift the supply curve right. However, a decrease in net export will shift the demand curve from the right side to the left side. So the equilibrium point will shift from point A to point B. Therefore, the dollar will be depreciated. In conclusion, the overall price will decrease, the real GDP will decrease, and both of the real exchange rate and the nominal exchange rate will decrease. The fourth question is, based on our analysis, do we agree with the belief of the President Trump? We are not agree with the belief of the President Trump that the U.S. economy will be improved due to the trade war. As what we mentioned in the earlier question, in terms of the U.S. economy, the increase in the tariff doesn't affect the net export, and the net capital outflow will reduce the net export in the United States. So both of the net export and the real GDP will decrease. Additionally, the US dollars will be appreciated. As a matter of fact, we conclude that the damage brought by the trade war is much larger than its benefits. The third required question is about the quantitative easing policy. In the past decade, the quantitative easing policy was often used by the federal government in the United States. As a matter of fact, Japan and European Union also engaged quantitative easing policies before, and in the next page, I will briefly introduce the policy. What is the quantitative easing policy, and what is the difference between quantitative easing policy and conventional monetary policy? Quantitative easing is a form of unconventional monetary policy in which a central bank purchases longer-term securities from an open market in order to increase the money supply and encourage lending and investment in an economy. Buying these securities adds new money to the economy and also serves to lower the interest rate by bidding up fixed income securities. It can also expand the central bank's balance sheet. Let's take a look at the following picture to illustrate the process of the quantitative easing. First, the central bank will create more money so that they can buy financial assets such as bonds from financial institutions, which can reduce interest rates and let businesses and people to borrow more. so that they spend more money and create job opportunities. Eventually, this policy can boost the economy. Traditionally, the conventional monetary policy lowers short-term interest rates to increase private saving and achieve the goal of boosting total demand. However, once the short-term interest rates have fallen to a level close to zero, which is the so-called zero interest rate bond. Since the nominal interest rate cannot be negative, it can no longer be lowered. During this period, the conventional monetary policy will become ineffective. As a matter of fact, quantitative easing has generally been used by the central bank when conventional monetary policies are not effective or sufficient. I'm going to give one historical example to show how Fed uses the quantitative easing policy in response to a crisis or event in the United States. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the coronavirus crisis in the United States and the associated business closures, event cancellations, and work-from-home policies has triggered a deep economic downturn of uncertain duration. The Fed had brought down its interest rate to nearly 0%. The U.S. Federal Reserve also announced its plan to implement up to $1.5 trillion in asset purchases as an emergency measure to provide liquidity to the U.S. financial system. In the second question, we mentioned about the COVID-19 pandemic that caused a recession in the U.S. economy. And now I'll use appropriate models to explain how the quantitative easing policy can solve this problem. Let's look at the first graph. An increase in the money supply shifts the money supply curve from the left side to the right side. Therefore, the interest rate will fall down. The falling interest rate increased the quantity of goods and services demanded. An increase in the quantity of goods and services demanded at any given price level shifts the aggregate demand curve from the left side to the right side by increasing consumption, government spending, and the money supply. So the whole economy will move back to its original equilibrium point A. As a matter of fact, both of the deflation and the recession will be solved.
Hello, today I'm going to answer the question of Economic Quick Quiz 2, and I'm Chen Piqi from Business Administration. And today I'm going to answer the optional question 2 and optional question 3. First, what is Abenomics? Since coming to the power in late 2012, Prime Minister Abe Shizong and his government unveiled a comprehensive policy package to revive the Japanese economy from 2 decades of deflation, all while maintaining fiscal discipline to make the Japanese economy more competitive. And its immediate goal is to boost domestic demand and gross domestic product (GDP) growth, while raising inflation to 2%. And next, what are 3 errors mentioned in Abenomics? First one, drawing monetary easing to boost the economy. The government is making the central bank release more money into the market, creating additional currency to make Japanese exports more attractive and generate modest inflation. Basically, the Japanese government is putting pressure on the central bank to flood the markets with cash. And second, a robust fiscal policy. New government spending programs to stimulate demand and consumption, to stimulate short-term growth, and to achieve a budget surplus over the long term. The point is that the Japanese government is spending more to boost the Japanese economy. And the last one, policies for growth to spur private investment. This policy includes a reform of various regulations to make Japanese industries more competitive and to encourage investment in and from the private sector. For example, Lowering corporation tax is aimed to make business easier to do in Japan, increasing the labor participation of women. Because bringing women into the workforce is a way to plug the labor shortage, governments make policies for providing more childcare workers and childcare facilities, more openness to foreigners in society, lowering of regulation barriers, like lowering of barriers to foreign direct investment in Japan. Next, I'm going to use models to explain why Mr. Abe tried to use these errors to save Japanese economy from the recession. And due to the recession, firms in Japan had lower motivation to produce or sell products, so the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left and cause the point A move to point B, and cause the quantity of real output recession and price inflation. And it also and the policy is to increase the money supply. So the money supply will move from MS1 to MS2 and cause the interest rate decrease. And this is a result of after using the joint monetary easing. Due to the lower interest rate, the quantity of goods and service at each price level increases. The aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, move from blue AD to red AD, and also cause the point B move to point C, and cause the expansion of quantity of real output, and cause the price level inflate from P2 to P3. And this is the second error, a robust fiscal policy. Like I mentioned before, due to the recession, firms in Japan had lower motivation to produce or sell, so the supply curve shifted to the left and caused a recession and a price inflation. And after a robust fiscal policy, due to increase of government spending, the aggregate demand curve also increased, so the curve will shift to the right and also cause the expansion and price inflation. And the last one is policies for growth to spur private investment. Like I mentioned before, due to a recession, short-run aggregate supply curve shift to the left and cause a recession and price inflation. And after policies for growth to spur private investment, due to increase of investment in the private sector, the aggregate demand curve also increased and shift to the right. And the result is the expansion of quantity of real output and the price inflation. And to sum up, these three errors also cause the aggregate demand curve shift to the right, and unemployment rate decreased. Japan currency was inflation. And next is optional question 3. To introduce both Keynes and Hayek and explain why they are important. First, I'm going to introduce John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was born in Cambridge, England. He studied classics and mathematics at King's College, Cambridge. Since Keynes created macroeconomics in the 1930s, the field has grown to be half of all introductory courses in economics and has become well represented and respected among academic economic publications. And next is I will going to explain why Keynes is important today. He was considered helpful in the golden age of economic growth after the Second World War. He made his name by analyzing short-run problems caused by stickiness and some important prices. He spearheaded a revolution in economic thinking, challenging the idea of neoclassical economics that held the free markets. Now I'm going to introduce Hayek and explain why he is important. Friedrich Hayek is born in Vienna, Austria, in 1899. He was a leading member of the Austrian School of Economics, and his theory on how changing price relay information that helps people determine their plans is regarded as an important milestone achievement in economics. And this theory is what led him to the Nobel Prize in 1974. And next I'm going to explain why Hayek is important. After World War I, Hayek later said his experience in the war and his desire to help avoid the mistake that ignited the war drew him into economics. And Hayek's approach mostly stemmed from the Austrian School of Economics and emphasizes the limited nature of knowledge. He is particularly famous for his defense of free market capitalism and is remembered as one of the greatest critics of the socialist consensus. And the second question, to summarize the arguments made by both Keynes and Hayek and point out their main differences in the argument. And first, I'm going to introduce the background. In the early 20th century, there is a Great Depression. The U.S. Federal Reserve had kept interest rates too low throughout the 1920s. Consumer spending and capital investment dropped, causing steep declines in industrial output and unemployment. So Keynes saved some theories to solve this problem. First, steer markets, sticky wages and cost persistent wage. And the most important one is government should intervene to soften the depression and relieve the jobless. Keynes advocated the use of fiscal and monetary policies to ease the adverse effects of economic recessions, and increase government purchasing, decrease saving, and increase spending. And these two will also affect increased aggregate demand. He argued that aggregate demand as well as total spending in the economy determine the overall level of economic activity, and that inadequate aggregate demand would lead to many periods of high unemployment. However, for Hayek, he thinks should set them free, as well as free markets, and markets will heal themselves, and government shouldn't intervene. He disputed the use of fiscal policy in moderating the ups and downs of the economy, and too much aggregate demand ignored people's action and motivation. Increased saving to invest, malinvestment wreck the economic, and be opposite to Keynes' theory, for he thought it would cause credit crunch, liquidity trap, and new money is confused for real loanable funds, for it's just inflation and will cause future destruction. And the main difference between Keynes and Hayek is that Keynes thinks government should intervene and help to soften the depression. However, Hayek thinks government shouldn't interfere the market. And the second difference is that Keynes thinks the society should decrease saving and increase spending, and also increase aggregate demand, and they will help the unemployment and increase the real GDP. While Hayek thinks the society should increase saving to investment, for he thought too much spending will break the economic. So it's the end of my answer.
Thanks for your listening.